Hey there, it's Chris with Acton Creative, and this is a handwoven experience. And in today's episode, I'm going to tackle EPI versus PPI. You know, when you become a weaver, there's like a whole other vocabulary to learn, right? There are different words, there's different phrases, and all kinds of abbreviations. So today, I thought that I would talk about two really important abbreviations in the weaving vocabulary and make sure you understand what they are, how they apply to you in your project, and what are the kind of benefits and challenges of both of them. So let's start with EPI. That stands for ends per inch. Now, ends per inch refers to the spacing between your warp yarns. I'm sitting at my table loom here, my beater bar this way for orientation. These are the warp yarns going through the loom under tension. These are the weft yarns that are typically in a shuttle going the opposite direction, just so you have those terms down right there. So EPI refers to ends per inch, which refers to your spacing. How far apart are your warp yarns? That is ends per inch. And when we talk about EPI, we're talking about the set, S-E-T-T. Now, what's interesting is that a set or your ends per inch is really determined by a couple of things. First of all, what kind of yarn do you have? What are you working with? And secondly, what do you want to accomplish in your project? So let's talk about the yarn for just a moment. Imagine that you have two options. You're going to use, or you have a really fat, chunky, fuzzy yarn as an option, and then you have one that's much finer, that's like a quarter of the size. If you space those yarns the same spacing, the fat, chunky, fuzzy one could be shoulder to shoulder with its neighbor, whereas the much finer yarn could have a lot of gaps in between each other. Right? So you have to look at the kind of yarn that you're using to establish your ends per inch or your set. You also need to think about your project, because you might intentionally want to have yarns that are shoulder to shoulder and really with no space in between them, like in a rep weave project. Or you may want to create a fabric that has a much lighter hand. You want more air. It needs to be softer and more airier. That's the only word I can think of. So you have to kind of think of the yarn as well as the application when you're deciding on what your ends per inch should be. And what's lovely is that the yarn manufacturers help us, at least give us a place to start. When you look at the information for yarn online, weaving yarn online, they will give you a suggested range for your set. And it's usually, say, like for my beloved carpet warp and 8/4 cotton, it's usually like, say, 8 to 12 or 8 to 15 or something like that. And what that range tells you is that the bottom number is what they suggest for plain weave, for tabby, over, under, over, under. The bigger number is what they suggest for a twill. Now, you're going to do a lot of other patterns besides plain weave and twill, but it gives you kind of an idea to start. And even if your pattern isn't a twill pattern, it may suggest that you use twill spacing. Let me give you an example, just so you kind of have a visual for what I'm talking about. This is a project where I solely played with the ends per inch. So here's what I did. These are my warp yarns going this way. These are my weft yarns going this way. So as you can see over here, they're shoulder to shoulder, right? They're right next to each other. The ends per inch is very close. And then I made it a little less and then a little looser. So there's there's all this space in between. But what this little sample illustrates is how the ends per inch influences your project. Look, you can't see any red here, right? And over here, you see all red. Is that fascinating? Ends per inch is a really important decision, important factor in each of your weaving projects. So that's the good news, is that it is a very important and very critical part of each project. The bad news is it is hard to change on the fly, right? So if you are tackling a new project and you're not sure of what your ends per inch, what your set should be, I recommend maybe trying a little sample just to see if it's going to give you the hand and the kind of feel for the fabric that you want, because it could be very subtle. Maybe instead of placing your yarns at 12 ends per inch, you just want to spread them out so there may be 8 yards per inch, or vice versa. So That is a little summary of ends per inch. Now let's dive into PPI, which stands for picks per inch. So, ends per inch talked about the warp yarns and how closely they're spaced. Well, picks per inch refers to the weft yarns and how closely they are spaced, right? Just a reminder, your weft yarns are the yarns typically in your shuttle. They're going the opposite direction, this way back and forth. Now, in a project when you are kind of debating over picks per inch, again, just like ends per inch, it really influences the kind of sturdiness or looseness of your fabric, and that affects the overall hand of the project, right? Same kind of thing. The good news about picks per inch, though, is that you can really adjust it on the fly. You can, mid-project, decide that you are going to beat firmer or more relaxed, right? And that is really the beauty of adjusting your picks per inch, is that you have control about how hard you are pulling this towards you every time you throw your shuttle. Now, here's what I find as the challenging part about picks per inch, is that for me, and probably most weavers out there, I have a natural rhythm to how I am weaving, how tightly I pull the beater bar towards me, squishing my weft yarns together, right? I have kind of a natural rhythm that I use for that. And what I find is that if, per the project, I need to really tweak that, it is hard for me to maintain it. I will be very honest. I usually try to adjust any other way except for how many picks per inch I have, because I have just discovered that I know myself, and if I have to beat very loosely, I'll do it for a while and then I forget. And then, I'm loosely watching a TV show and I go back to my regular kind of rhythm for it. So then it's not the looseness or the tightness that I need for my project. So for me, that is the challenging part about picks per inch, is the fact that you then have to be consciously aware of every time you pull the beater bar forward, you are doing with the same amount of pressure so that you have the same kind of spacing in between your weft yarns. But you can absolutely adjust as you go, which is, that's definitely in the pro column for PPI as well. So I hope that gave you an interesting kind of overview of those two really regularly used abbreviations in the weaving language: ends per inch, EPI, and picks per inch, PPI. Now, what's fun is that in the past, I have done separate videos about just those topics. So I'll put little links to those in the description if you want to go back to the basics and look at those as well. It's a hot topic. All right, friends. Hope that gave you a little something to chew on. And if you're just a beginner, hope that gave you some insight into what those are, why they're important, and how to use them. All right, friends. Have a great week. Happy weaving.